I'm Sarah Russell.
I'm JQ Walker.
I'm Hind, and we are
The Neurodivergent Report, a research-based podcast by and for neurodivergent brains.
In each episode, we'll explore topics relating to neurodiversity and coping strategies by reviewing the literature and discussing current topics.
We will also have interview episodes where we sit down with experts in the field and listeners like you, with the hope that together we can all learn to heal in community.
However you are able to engage, thank you for being here. Hello, I'm Sarah Russell, the host of the Neurodivergent Report, and today I am so glad to be here with Gregg Pauletti from NeuroSynchrony Health.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. This is great. I'm really happy to be here and share kind of my world with you.
Yeah, I heard you love talking about neurotypes, neurodivergence, and the inner workings of our brain. So same, let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Let's do it. Love it.
Awesome. So your practice is based in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is super local to me. I was really surprised, sort of like to get a knock from my own backyard.
Amazing. So Greenwich is great, right? Like it's being so close to the city. I think there's so much opportunity. So
Yes,
we enjoy it here. I grew up in Northern Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area. We left, high school and came to New England and went to college. And I kind of never left New England.
yeah.
I settled in the Boston area originally with my wife, and then we moved to Greenwich at this point.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Quick
so we've been here
diversion.
since.
When you were growing up in Virginia, would you say it was a particularly diverse area?
Not even close.
Not even close. I appreciate your honesty. Cool.
Yeah, I say, grew up in like kind of the Washington D.C. area, which is absolutely very diverse, actually.
You never know.
But
Yeah.
it was just far enough west into like rural Virginia, almost to West Virginia, actually. That
I'm hearing banjos.
Yeah, a little bit further west, and you're in the middle of banjo country, I think. It was kind of the entry to the Shenandoah Valley. It's a beautiful area. It was a great place to grow up. But I left and found other places and found New England, and this has been a great place to call home since. So, yeah.
Well, it's great to have you. I love it here too. So let's talk a little bit about what you do there at the practice. So NeuroSynchrony Health is what kind of place?
Yeah, so we're a brain care clinic. My background is in clinical mental health counseling, and specifically cognitive remediation, working with people who have cognitive impairment of some way, shape, or form, and for lots of different reasons. Usually there's a psychological component to it. And my partner, my co-owner, is a psychiatrist, and had also been working kind of in the neuroscience space and obviously working with people in brain health. And we started because we were noticing that there weren't really any good answers, specifically in the mental health world initially. And there's no quantitative way to measure like how we're helping someone. Psychiatry is notorious for this. It's like, oh, just kind of guessing and throwing things at the wall.
So subjective.
Right?
Not very sciencey. My husband constantly calls psychology a soft science, and he makes it sound like, oh, that's not even real science. And it's obviously, just the physics thing. But
exactly. And
to be fair, there's some firming up to do.
There is a lot of firming up to do, right? And so we're trying to do the firming, right? We're trying to take this area that is super subjective, and obviously our goal is to help people, but how can we do it in a quantitative way, in a way that like there's objective measurement? And so we started NeuroSynchrony Health because one of the treatments, actually a couple of the treatments that we're using, cognitive remediation being one, you can do a before and after, right? We can do measurements that can show increases or, hopefully never decreases. We can do EEG recordings and see what changes are taking place, and not just saying, oh, well, here's a pill, right? Tobias, Dr. Helene, but, prescribing medication and hoping something that changes like that this just wasn't flying for us.
Yeah, and then using like self-report data, again, subjective.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
yeah.
So brain health
Amazing.
clinic, we're trying to give like personalized, individualized care to people and provide like really tangible information to help people kind of figure things out and to feel better and to kind of live their best life.
That is so well put. And it's refreshing to hear it from like a quote unquote medical professional.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
uh, you would hope that everyone, and I think everyone does want
I
that or
know,
want
but they
this
just get
benefit.
so busy, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Frankly, I think you're
In
right.
practice, I mean, when you're actually in front of them, it's just too busy to think about the full picture. And yeah. Anyway, sorry. I'm having my own medical stuff. It's chronic illness, like, hello.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some days I'm like, ooh, I
Mhm.
sound really resentful. And so I check myself on that. Anyway,
Well, it's hard not to.
so
I mean, there's a lot going on.
yeah. Yeah, but at least I have the self-awareness to be able to snap back, honestly. That's one of my measures to make sure that I am still doing okay.
That's a huge one, right? That's probably one of the most important one. And gaining insight, right, is
hmm
really,
Yeah,
really valuable.
mindfulness has been really important for my own healing journey. It's really been the only thing that help, I think. Well, so it initially helped me recognize good and bad and like, oh, it's not bad all the time. Okay, like I'm mindfully collecting data where I'm not miserable all the time. So that's how mindfulness sort of helped me, but obviously it has its limitations, right? And so some of the more unconventional things that you do at your practice is something called transcranial magnetic stimulation. Is that right?
That is right. Yes, that is one of them. A big part of what we do. 100%.
Yeah. And I have done some reading on it in an ADHD context, but I know that most of the research is into like depression, how it affects depression symptoms.
Yeah. I mean, I think to understand, we'll just call it TMS for short, if that's okay. To understand TMS, you really have to kind of go back to where it started. I say we, like the scientific community started studying it in the 80s, right? So it's not something that just kind of randomly popped up. It's been used as a treatment and studied for decades.
And
Nearly all of, yeah.
this is magnets specifically because they've been doing like shocking the brain with stuff for longer than that, but this is like magnets. This is not
Yeah.
electroshock.
I'm really so grateful you say that because sometimes I forget, right? Like people, like let's back up and like, what is this little thing we're talking about? So yes, this is using a magnetic field to influence the way your neurons are working, right? So it's not shocking, it's not putting electrical current in your brain or anything like that. It's using magnetic pulses to kind of tell your brain, tell your neurons what to do, essentially. Um, um, in most of the work with TMS centered around helping people with depression, and that's you mentioned, right, that's where the majority of the studies have been because that's where it started.
Okay.
And
And so are they
more
looking
recent,
at specific regions of the brain for that? And now they're starting to branch out?
exactly right.
I'm
So
jumping ahead. Yes.
no, I mean, that's exactly right. So initially, it was thought we have been able to pinpoint like one part of the brain that is primarily responsible for mood regulation and helping people feel better from a depression standpoint.
What's
And
that?
now that is the left DLPFC, the right dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. And now we know that the right side of that DLPFC has a really important role in executive functioning and attention and impulsivity control. And there's some other areas around the brain that also play a role in kind of the activation or deactivation for any particular symptoms. And so when you apply a magnetic field to those areas, you can influence them and influence those neurons and by extension influence behavior and influence kind of our natural tendencies.
That is such a lovely way to explain it. I feel like I understand it now for the very first time. A
um,
little.
thanks. Normally maybe I hope you're not just being kind. I get caught up in the weeds, and I'm really excited to learn. Every day is a learning
No, that
opportunity
was
for me.
super simple.
So
That was great. I'm very excited because I'm also thinking about research that they've done on, stimming and sort of brain wave oscillations.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
There's a
and
lot out
basically
there.
stimming facilitated self-regulation in those studies,
Yeah, there's an acronym
which
called
is also emotional self-regulation as part can be part of that.
by extension, of course, right? It has to be. There's an acronym called NIBS, NIBS. That oh my gosh, I'm blanking on what it means right now, but it's basically kind of encapsulates the whole field of like neurostimulation essentially, and there's lots of different modalities and methods for that. TMS being one of them, and so it's non-invasive something stimulation, but it's basically this idea that we can influence kind of our brains in a non-invasive way.
Is it bilateral stimulation? No,
I'll figure it out. I'll let you
that's
know.
something else.
It's something else. But yeah, so it's
That's
it
so
is a
cool.
growing field. It is considered young and kind of cutting edge.
Hmm.
And I would argue the last 5 years, there's been a ton of advances in the technology and the ability to do it. And I mentioned when we first started, like we use an EEG, which is an electroencephalogram, which is normally what hospitals might do to do sleep studies or see if a person has a seizure activity. But that
Hmm.
technology has come such a long way. We can do it kind of wirelessly with a headset that doesn't add goop or stuff in your hair, and get a very good understanding of kind of the electrical activity in a person's brain, and then be able to tailor treatment based on that information, which is something that is not being done very often,
No,
or
it
by many
sounds
people.
like it should be done.
100% should. We're lucky enough. One of our director, our basically our data and our EEG lab, right? We have one of the brightest minds in the world analyzing our EEGs. So we're lucky enough to have him on our team and to be able to do that. Um, Without him, I don't know that we would be able to do a very good job. But
Oh,
yeah,
so is
the
this a
goal.
case of AI? Not AI, that's the wrong phrasing, but like a large learning model being able
Um,
to do this in the future to sort of
for other
limit the
people,
human error. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think so. I think that at some point there needs to have some sort of algorithm or ability to kind of
Well, because
scale
I've
and like
been just, I mean,
universally do it.
it's probably not that far off because I've read research on, they've been looking at using it for diagnostic purposes, using it to measure people's vocal,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, something so
So
basic.
the application in this case, right, would be to for AI or computers or whatever to be able to see trends in all the different scans that have ever been done, and be able to pinpoint kind of changes and things that might indicate one
Oh,
condition or
yeah.
another. The way we're doing it, and why we have him as an expert, right, is because the process of the way you process an EEG and look at and analyze it and look at all the information, because it's tons of information, right, is very specific and requires an expert essentially to do it in order to actually get something meaningful anyway. And
Hmm.
so that's what we do.
Yeah, so we're farther away from that, I guess, but I guess, yeah, as you were saying, the technology is still there. Okay.
It's growing every day for sure.
Oh, I wanted to ask also, okay, so I want to make sure that we're clear about who this treatment method is for.
Yes.
Because I wasn't sure that it would be something they would use on kids.
So traditional TMS wasn't really used on kids, wasn't really studied on kids. Um, it can be intense. The pediatrics
Like
wasn't
in
really
a
part of that world.
sensory kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned like magnetic pulses going onto your brain, like the intensity of that experience. Like it's first of all very hard to describe what it feels like. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't feel good. Like sometimes you might say it's like a woodpecker pecking on your head, or like tapping a pin on your head. It depends on the person, and kind of how they feel it. But you do increase and decrease the intensity based on kind of what you're trying to accomplish. And so for that reason, in depression, there isn't a whole lot of pediatric major depression going on, so there wasn't really a lot of studies going on there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now we've gotten to the point where we can decrease intensity, and we're using it for other things like ADHD and autism in some other areas, and using EEGs to kind of guide the treatment. And so you can make it more accessible and do it with kids. Frankly, there's a lot of like off-label experimental stuff. We're not doing it with autism, but I think there are other clinics in other places around the country that are doing studies in clinics and doing it with kids with autism, as young as
What
3-4
sort
years
of
old.
symptoms are they targeting with that?
With autism in particular, it's about improving communication pathways, improving sleep architecture. Both are really, really important for everyone, but that's
Yes.
really what they're thinking. And then ADHD symptoms, so reducing impulsivity and hyperactivity is another area that they're trying to kind of to help with. So our
Yeah,
clinic,
definitely needs. Definitely, those are huge needs.
yep, without a doubt. In the mostly nothing zero, but when there's a situation where you have a treatment that the effects, or like the side effects, I guess we'll call it, are fairly minimal, there's very little downside to not trying when the impact of not trying or doing nothing is pretty high. Like the cost of
Other
doing
than
nothing is pretty
some
high.
physical
Right.
discomfort. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Physical discomfort is pretty much it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've personally been so desperate that I've just tried like the binaural beats. I was like, what is this gonna possibly do for me? I mean, not to knock binaural beats, like actually it was pretty good, but it wasn't like a cure-all. Like I had to find
No.
the right thing, you know?
Well,
And so I wish that I could have gone to a concierge and been like, can you just fix my brain a little? Just
well,
scan it and
it'd be amazing if that existed, right? And I would never say what we're doing, nor
50
I think that
years
it'd
from
be
now, we'll be on a conversation talking about it.
maybe, right? Which would be wild. I think it's pretty irresponsible for anyone to say like, "Oh yeah, we fix it. You're gonna be perfect, right? There's gonna be no problems
Oh.
anymore." And we would never dream of that. I think that no
Mhm.
matter what we're talking about, no matter what you're doing, it could be a psychiatrist prescribing medication, it can be a therapist doing, cognitive behavioral therapy, it could be us doing TMS. It has to be done with goals in mind, right? Whether it be symptom
Mhm.
reduction or impulsivity reduction, it has to be done in conjunction with other people on the team, right? An OT or a therapist, if we're talking pediatrics, would be really valuable. Parents and teachers and everyone kind of understanding, like, all right, so what are we trying to get out of this, and
Mhm.
and how can we help this person kind of improve their quality of life? Ultimately, that is in the back of our mind when we do that first evaluation and say, okay, so like really, how can we best help you? Because maybe it's not doing an EEG and doing TMS treatment, right? Like maybe it's something different that they need. Now, I'm under the mind that, like, again, the cost of doing it in terms of side effects and other, like, is pretty low. So why
Mhm.
not try it? Because at the very minimum, in my mind, like nearly everyone who does treatment improves their sleep, like right off the bat. I don't think we've had a patient that have said after a few days that like their sleep did not improve. It's pretty wild how that is like such an integral part of just like feeling better. But that's a big component. But if you can have improved clarity of thought or improved like being able to focus, like that's all good too. And I think it's hard to argue that that wouldn't be like a good outcome, even if nothing else changed.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I love this. I want to pivot a little bit to
Yeah.
talking about the research paper. Really quickly, I'm just going to say, let's see. Yeah, so basically, it's just a systematic review and a meta-analysis.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big
Which is
deal.
a Yeah, I mean, right? That's an important thing. The fact that there's enough studies that there can be a meta-analysis, that's an important step for sure.
That's true. I forget. I think I was doing a research podcast on nature and ADHD, and they weren't able to do like a systematic review or a meta-analysis because of that terms issue, that heterogeneity. I can't pronounce it,
Heterogeneity.
but
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
So my problem is impulsivity. I don't slow down enough to pronounce
Yeah.
the word correctly. So I'll just like stumble through it. I'm just going to like burst my way through it like the Kool-Aid man through the wall, and we're going to move on. But so that's really why I was thinking about that question also.
Yep.
Anyway, so this is the meta-analysis is on the TMS. And this came out in 2024. I think the TLDR here is that they saw symptom reduction.
Yeah, so these are tricky, right? Because and TMS is tricky. I think we should just talk about it because studies are typically designed to target one particular diagnosis or disorder, right? And so for TMS, it's becoming very clear that it has applications for many different types of disorders. And so when you're looking at a meta-analysis, it's looking at the improvement for overall, can it help people across different diagnoses, right? And then how is it helping people? What is being used to understand? What measures are being used to figure out, like, is it helping people? And so you have to really read between the lines and understand, like, okay, so for depression, what's it doing here? What's it doing for substance use? What's it doing for ADHD? What's it doing for schizophrenia? And
Yeah.
and how is it doing? And we talked about location, right? Like which location on the brain is it using? And so when we have this term like heterogeneity, usually like the greater heterogeneity there is, it usually means like there are so many variables out there that it's really hard to identify which one is like the causal factor. And that's where the research just has to continue to come along. And there are studies that are being published every week at this point on TMS, which is that's a good thing. It's being heavily scrutinized and heavily looked at. But what needs to happen is like the methods for this work needs to kind of fall into line, and it needs to be standardized the way people are kind of understanding it. So
right, like using like terms, kind of.
exactly.
Yeah.
And methods.
I think every field goes through this a little bit. Every new topic goes through this a little bit. Like there's a little bit of infighting over what we're going to call things, and maybe for better or worse, a little bit of ego stuff over like who's going to claim the credit. That's okay. I'm just academia is what it is. This is people's livelihoods. I get it. Very exciting that we have this paper because okay, so they did identify like that as a limitation. Specifically they said like inconsistencies in reporting, but like maybe
that's
next year there will be another meta-analysis on like a new batch of research.
I think that we see things changing right now is the meta-analysis are not being, it's not about there are not too many being done about the entire field at large. There being meta-analysis about each particular diagnosis, right? So
like the application for the thing.
Exactly right. So it's the meta-analysis on the impact of TMS on ADHD or on OCD or on anxiety. Right? So it's getting more specific.
Oh,
and that's
so
a
what
lot
you're saying
easier.
is you don't expect to see another paper like this one for a long time.
I don't know. I don't think so. Probably not for a little while, because ultimately, how much value is it in understanding the overall impact of TMS across mental health disorders, right? I think it's much more valuable to understand it in its impact on each individual, because not every mental health disorder is the same. All symptoms are all different. Like
yes. And well, even under the same diagnosis, the symptom presentation can be so varied, but we're not going to get into that. That's a different podcast.
that would take an entire another hour probably, right? Because you're spot on. They're so varied.
For sure. And that's why I asked
similar.
Specifically what ADHD stuff you were looking at. And I sort of paused for a minute because I was wondering, like, how do you even limit impulsivity? Like, the only way to stop impulsivity is to, like, slow people down or make them pause, or, like, you can't, like, give someone self-awareness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
or
gaining insight.
Can you zap that in?
Well, so that's a really fascinating question. And like thought, right? Like, because we know the area of the brain that controls that area. It's actually, in my partner, Dr. Tobias is probably, he's definitely the expert, and you should have a conversation. We should all do it together another time. But my
Tell him I got
understanding,
really excited about this one.
the fascinating part about, impulsivity and ADHD in general, at least to me, is that, and it's kind of backwards in the thought process, is that it's over the right DLPFC over here, and that area is like hypoactivated is what it's called. And so by activating that area, you're increasing a person's ability to control their impulses, right? So it's activating an area that's more globally responsible for like executive functioning. I hate that term because it's way overused and way like really misunderstood. But just think of it like our brain's control center, right?
Yeah.
So you're activating the area of the brain that makes you better at controlling everything. And that, from a symptom relief standpoint, looks like reduced impulsivity. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's like, it just seems so. Yes, I have been frustrated by the term executive functioning in the past. I
Yeah.
actually set out to like define it in the like, what does the research call it? And it's like, oh, actually, they're still arguing about it. Cool.
Yep.
Love that.
Yep.
Moving on. But
Yeah, I mean, like, because teachers have one understanding of it. There are executive functioning coaches who make their entire business around this term. From
yeah,
like a
but one thing that you said also is that the prefrontal like the specific part of the prefrontal cortex has
Yeah.
role in both like some of those executive functions, those planning tasks, but also in that emotional like mood stuff. And so I know in the past it's always been like a attention deficit. Actually, they're seeing that it's more like a struggle to regulate. It's a struggle to transition. It's like too fast, too fast.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is that you can just sort of target a specific area of the brain, and that makes it better able to manage the rest of the incoming stimuli and make better choices.
So
That's
sort of,
bad
it's actually,
phrasing.
so if you're targeting a part of the brain and you're actually asking it to speed up, you're actually asking it to turn on and activate a little more, which you would think like, oh, greater activation would mean maybe like greater impulsivity, but it's actually not the case, because that part of the brain that's not activated enough that you're asking to turn on a little more is what's responsible for controlling the other part, like the impulsivity. So you're saying, okay, think of it like
Oh, I
being
see.
drowsy, like a
So
person kind of being drowsy, like you're turning on an area that's
I
like
I
drowsy.
had it backwards.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's just you gotta flip it a little bit, and that's that's the natural thing to do. Like you would think of like,
Well,
oh,
and
you're
it
trying to activate
yeah, and it's making me think about sensory processing stuff and how
it.
like most people just know, like most people their nervous system just intuitively like filters out stimuli that and that's normal. That's how our
Yep,
bodies are supposed to work. But for some
yep,
people, our bodies don't process out the right stuff, and so that can
yep,
cause distressing symptoms. And so
100%.
what you're saying to me also sounds like, yeah, by stimulating that region of the brain, like it's better able to provide the context needed to make the snap decisions.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And this, for me, this is really cool and interesting to think about. Like I mentioned, the use of EEGs, right? Because so we can measure the
Yeah.
electroactivity that's going on and identify a person like with ADHD, for example. What this looks like on like an electrical standpoint is more of their brain, especially in that particular area, is operating at a slower speed in terms of like hertz, like literally speed,
And you would be
than
able
what
to
it
see
should
that.
be. And you can see that exactly on the graph. I can show you, the back, the middle, the front, and like what's going
Maybe I
on.
should have driven to Greenwich.
Anytime you want, we'll do it, right? Or but being able to, again, being able to show someone who is saying, I have impulse control or whatever is going on, say, actually, hey, that makes complete sense. This is what your brain's telling us too, and this is how we can change it. Like the power and being able to see that and create a plan and act on it is really powerful. And actually, we didn't even talk about it, but then following up. Um, uh, in doing another scan, however many sessions or whatever later, and say, okay, so what has changed? Is anything changing? Is what we're doing working? And then
Right,
changing
which
and
is why
modifying
having
different
that
things.
target identified is so important.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So yeah, the brain is fascinating. And one thing you mentioned earlier that I think is really important to just talk and sit on for a minute is, at least with ADHD, but like it becoming increasingly clear that there's no one concrete way to define a person who, especially define an experience for someone who's living with ADHD, right? Like
Yeah.
it's really much like, autism is a spectrum, right? ADHD is becoming increasingly clear that it is a spectrum of different kind of symptoms and behaviors and experiences. And, I hate to use the word severity, but like every person falls along this kind of continuum in terms of what they're experiencing and severity of symptoms. Um, and it would be really great for just society at large to understand what that looks like from an everyday standpoint, because people would be better understood, and kids would be better understood, and it would allow for just the conversation to progress a lot more, other than just be like, oh, that kid's being really disrespectful because they're not sitting still, right? Like where
Yeah,
the jump.
absolutely. I haven't mentioned it, but I've noticed you stuttering a little bit over some of the medical model lingo
Yeah,
that's been like burned into your brain from
yeah,
your training as a clinical
yeah,
therapist.
yeah.
But yeah, actually, recently I recorded a research episode with my co host, Jay, and we are talking about the neurodiversity model and how that's sort of like in between, right? Like the person is not fully the problem, society is not fully the problem, but like it's that nature versus nurture moment.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, yeah, so just sort of rephrasing all of that language to be more compassionate, really to assume positive intent. I mean, even as a parent, I don't know if are you a parent?
I am a parent of 4 kids, actually. Yeah. I have a
Oh,
child in every developmental stage right now, 3, 6, 9, and 12. Yep.
I have an 11-and-a-half-year-old, and it is hard.
Yeah, it really is. It's totally hard. I have a yeah,
Why are
so
they teenagers right now? Anyway,
yeah.
wow. Okay, so I really am just a more pleasant parent when I'm not yelling at my kids. It has
Oh, I
that sort of like two-way impact where if I'm yelling at
mhm,
them, I'm also feeling bad. And so now I want to yell more.
mhm.
And so if I can just avoid that by assuming positive intent and assuming, whoopsies,
Yep,
you can't
totally.
do that.
Yep.
Um, Anyway, and I'm trying to practice that with adults as well now because we're all
Yeah,
struggling with communication and every I think most of us deserve more compassion.
every human deserves compassion, right? If on most good days, right, when I'm speaking, I'll give an example of my little ones, right? Like my 3 and 6-year-old. If I can bring myself down to that when I'm trying to explain or teach or just like have a conversation and think about, be present with them. If I can do that with adults, how much more effective would I be in that conversation, or whatever I'm looking for and whatever we're talking about, and like how much better would we be from a societal standpoint, I suppose, as well. So I think that, yeah, I think you're exactly right. You need to give a little dose of empathy and compassion to kind of all things we're doing, for sure. And being present. I think I can't say enough how important it is to just like be present and in the moment.
Yeah. That's one of those things that people with ADHD say they can't do.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like, that's exactly what I can't do. And I'm like, no, but you're doing it. Like eventually you do. But then you beat yourself up for like, it took me so long. And it's like, so what? You made it there. Have a
Um,
cupcake.
and exactly, I love it. Have a couple. I think by extension, like that's because they've been taught that they can't do it, right? But the reality
Yeah.
of it is like people with ADHD, and we're talking about attention more at large, right? It's simultaneously both the ability to focus, right? And then people with ADHD, usually the case is like they can hyper focus, or the ability to kind of take in all of the information all at once, to a point where sometimes it can be overwhelming and they jump around too much, right? Both sides can be true. And both sides usually are true. Sometimes you have to takes a little longer to figure out what they are, but giving people the credit in understanding that they can do both. Sometimes it can be really, really challenging. There's a lot of barriers in the way, but great.
So, awesome. Yeah, are you guys working on anything right now? Is there anything big on the horizon for your practice? You guys are working on a podcast.
We're constantly working on things. We are, well, I can't really announce it yet because we're not quite yet, but we're getting ready to partner with a nonprofit in New York City, and to be able to provide support and non-invasive, non-pharmaceutical based treatment to those in need, specifically with depression and other stuff. So it is exciting. And there's a component of this that will be able to analyze the data that we collect and kind of extract a much larger meaning behind kind of the whole treatment. So we're excited to be doing that. It's in the works. And operating relatively small for a little while now, and so we're kind of in the process of including that partnership, but just kind of ramping up and growing in the next 6 months to a year. So we're excited to see where that takes us.
That's awesome. Can I follow along? Where are you going to be posting about this? LinkedIn?
We have a blog on the website right now. We definitely have a social media presence on Instagram at NeuroSynchrony Health. So those, the website and the blog are two of the primary pieces. And then we're in the process of launching a podcast ourselves. So hopefully the Neural Currents is what it'll be called. And so stay tuned for that too.
That's exciting. Yeah. I'll check in with you before I post this, because maybe there will be updates. I can put it in the show notes. Amazing. Okay, one last question, and then I'll let you go. This is going to be just sort of a random thing from a deck. There's this company called We're Not Really Strangers, and they do like relationship building cards. Anyway, this is a confidence booster question. Okay. Think of someone who believes in you. What would they say your strengths are?
They would say one of my strengths is kind of being authentic and being with people, right? In terms of kind of understanding and traveling through whatever they're traveling through in the moment. I think that they would say that was a strength of mine. And I mentioned being present before, kind of goes along those lines.
Well, I agree. It has been lovely chatting with you.
This has been great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here. If you want to connect with the Neurodivergent Report, you can find us at ND Report Pod on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, Substack, etc.
If you're looking to support the show, the best thing you can do is subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Please do that.
And hey, if you want to check out more about us, visit our website at ndreportpod.com. And you can also go there if you want to be a guest contributor on the show.
Until next time, be well, do good.